Andre Fili versus Bryce Mitchell. We got minus 165 on Thug Nasty and plus 145 on Andre Fili. So let's start off with Andre Fili, who, in my opinion, is being a little bit too overlooked in this fight. Now, I haven't been the biggest Andre Fili fan from the get-go, but he has slowly started to win me over with each performance and showing in every single performance that he's, trying to become a better fighter and improving in between every single fight. Obviously the Sadiq Youssef fight, he dropped the ball there. That was a very close first round, I believe it was, where he did some good damage on Sadiq Youssef as well, but most of the judges ended up giving it to Sadiq. But yeah, that was a tough fight for Fili there. The Shayman Moraes fight was a great fight for him to really bust out and show that he can, he has finishing chops if it has to come down to it. And then obviously most recently the Charles Jourdain fight, very close. That first round, obviously Charles Jourdain wins because of the pretty much rocking him. And then in the second and third rounds, we really start to see Andre Fili start to lean on the grappling a little bit more. But the one thing that you can't really take away from Andre Fili is the fact that he has a very effective jab. And he doesn't really have the traditional style and stance of an actual striker because he likes to like wing the his hand down a little bit more. And he brings it up from all these awkward angles. That's a little bit harder for people to really see which angle it's coming from, whether it's going to the body or to the head. But he's very, very effective with it. He uses his range quite well too, so that's something to keep in mind. Something that has me, or two things that have me a little bit sketched out regarding Fili and how he has to deal with this upcoming matchup with Bryce Mitchell. So we haven't really seen him completely, tested in the grappling realm, or tested to a legitimate point since the Dennis Bermudez fight, which is a fight where he stuffed plenty of takedowns. I believe Dennis Bermudez was 1 of 11 in that fight, and Fili did a really good job of keeping that fight on the feet. But it also seemed to do with the fact that Fili had a sizable height advantage too. So whenever Dennis Bermudez was trying to like slam him or pick him up or something like that, Fili's feet were still on the ground. So it was a little bit harder for Dennis Bermudez to really complete those takedowns. We saw, and the second thing that kind of has me a little bit hesitant about Andre Fili is when we did see Sadiq Youssef on top of him, who's not really known to be, a grappler or a wrestler or anything like that. But Andre Fili did end up slipping in that fight. Sadiq Youssef found himself on top, and he did some good damage for about 2.5 to 3 minutes, where he was controlling and holding Fili down. So that has me a little bit sketched out. But in terms of on the feet here, I think Andre Fili absolutely has the advantage here. The one thing that he needs to worry about is, his kicks. Kicks are something that he likes to add to his game, but one, he's going to have to be really sure to like bring the kicks back as soon as he throws them out there, because Bryce Mitchell showed in his last fight against Charles Rosa that that's something that he looks for as an opening for a takedown, because Bryce Mitchell isn't the highest level wrestler out there, but he is a really good jiu-jitsu player. But to get that jiu-jitsu going, you need to have good enough wrestling to get fights to the ground, or hope that your opponent slips or something like that. You got to get it to the ground somehow, some way. And I believe about 2 or 3 fights ago now, Bryce Mitchell actually went to start training at the University of Arkansas with some of the wrestling team over there, who's slowly starting to cement themselves as a higher level wrestling school. So that's something that he's clearly working on. And I'd be interested to see how he's able to translate into this fight against Andre Fili, because that's clearly where he needs this fight to go if he wants any chance of winning this fight. In terms of Bryce Mitchell's takedowns and what we've seen of him, his single leg seems to be pretty good. He turns angles very well when he does get that single leg. But I do think that Fili is slightly a higher level, grappler than what he has faced in the past, with the exception of Brad Katona and Tyler Diamond, he was also able to get down. But I'm not so sure about Diamond's and Katona's wrestling defense compared to their actual wrestling acumen. So that's something to be aware of. Bobby Moffitt willingly went out there and continuously took down Bryce Mitchell, and that's definitely where Bryce Mitchell wanted to fight. So that's where he was able to take it away. But then the Matt Sales fight, Sales looked like he had zero takedown defense in that, so he was able to get that fight to the ground and pull off that twister submission. And then the Charles Rosa fight, like Rosa had no answer at all for the jiu-jitsu that was coming his way from Bryce Mitchell. And then stupidly in every single round, Charles Rosa starts it off by throwing out a kick, a very lazy kick, and Bryce Mitchell was able to snatch it up and get the fight to the ground. So it's going to be intriguing to see how Andre Fili attempts to approach this, because he's going to have to go with the striking heavy game plan, at least with his hands, not with the kicks, or even if he does go with the kicks, aim them to the calf so they're the hardest to reach, and then get them back as soon as possible, and maybe follow up with some hands, or at least angle off to negate any type of follow-up takedown that Bryce Mitchell might have in those situations. Personally, you guys already know me. I like going with the grappler when we're talking about grappling and grapplers versus strikers, but I'm actually feeling Andre Fili here. It's funny how I threw that together. But, being the dog plus 145, so obviously he's the value side. If I'm assuming that this fight is a 50-50 fight, the only skepticisms I have, just like I said at the top of the breakdown, is the fact that we haven't really seen Fili tested recently with the grappling, nor was I really too excited about what I saw he had off of his back against Sodiq Yusuff. So that those things are lingering feelings for me here. But on the feet, I think he should do absolute work against Bryce Mitchell. That jab is going to be money for him. The movement's going to be money for him. The distance management, all of that stuff, that's something that he's going to need to worry about with Bryce Mitchell here. And I know that there might be some people that go out there and break down this fight saying that, okay, this fight's in a smaller cage, it's going to benefit the grappler. I don't believe too much into that. That's... I feel like that narrative of small cage versus big cage is so overblown, so I don't really look too much into that. So I do think that Andre Fili will have enough room to just keep circling off, doing enough work with his hands to kind of stifle the forward movement of Bryce Mitchell. And I'm not saying Bryce Mitchell is completely, lackluster and shit on the feet. He has some decent hands, and he has shown that he has power to drop guys and stuff like that. But the mechanics behind it, the openings that he leaves for his striking defense are questionable too. But man, I like Fili in this spot. But I really got to look into the rest of the dogs for this card, because I'd like to see a little bit more from Fili if I truly want to be comfortable here. But I do like him. He's getting a ton of disrespect just due to how dominant Bryce Mitchell looked in his last fight against Charles Rosa, and even the Matt Sales fight. That wasn't really even a fight, because Bryce Mitchell got that to the ground right away, and he was able to do work right off the bat and then pull off that twister. So he's looked so dominant in his last two performances that I think it's kind of reflecting in the odds, and it makes sense. That definitely does have an effect on the odds. But we got to step back and look at this. Look at his Bobby Moffitt performance. Look at the Tyler Diamond performance. There's some fights out there where he does start to gas later in the fight. So if things aren't completely going his way, how is it going to look? It's kind of like how I touched on the what's the other fight? There was one more fight where I'm talking about confidence. I do want to look at it. I do want to touch on it real quickly. It might be for this weekend, actually, or the coming weekend. Justin Gaethje. So that's a perfect example in terms of where a guy's cardio has been suspect in the past, but then looks really good in his most recent fight against Tony Ferguson, because everything's going his way. He's not stressing out or anything like that. It looks really good for him. So I'm a little bit skeptical about Andre Fili. However, I do lean him here as the dog, and I think he has a solid chance of pulling off the upside here by keeping this fight on the feet, kind of working the hands, continuously moving. And again, working over there at Team Alpha, you got to believe that some of his grappling and his wrestling have to be up to par enough to be able to defend whatever Bryce Mitchell's bringing over at him. So I like Andre Fili. I think he's a solid dog spot here. And I'll think about possibly taking a shot on him depending on what the other dogs on the card are saying or are whispering to me. But yeah, I like Andre Fili. I think he gets it done via decision. Maybe even third round stoppage. If we see Andre Fili go out there and touch up Bryce Mitchell for 2 rounds, it's really going to stress out Bryce. It's going to make him work. It's going to, affect his cardio, and we could see Andre Fili come alive in that third round, who we know has solid cardio himself too. So I do like Andre Fili, either third round finish or a decision. So final play, Andre Fili via decision.